everyone. Today I want to welcome Leslie Zane to my expert interview series. Leslie is an award-winning Fortune 500 brand consultant and behavioral expert. Her work has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, Knowledge at Wharton, Newsweek, and Ad Age. She is the president and founder of Triggers Brand Consulting, which was established in 1995. It was the first consultancy focused on applied behavioral science. Leslie's best-selling book, The Power of Instinct, challenges conventional marketing wisdom and offers thought-provoking perspectives rooted in the science of persuasion. Welcome, Leslie. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a number of questions, probably more than actually we have time for today. If you're ready, we can jump right in.
Go right ahead. Hit me.
Your book was amazing. In it, you assert that 95% of decisions we make are made on instinct. You make the case that traditional persuasion tactics aimed at the conscious mind are ineffective since about 5% of our decisions then are made consciously. Can you talk a little bit about where that 95% instinct statistic actually comes from?
Yes. So scientists agree at this point that the two mechanisms in our brains, the conscious mechanism and the non-conscious mechanism, that the non-conscious mechanism is absolutely the vast influence on the choices that we make. This comes up in Daniel Kahneman's work, decades and decades of scientific research that he did. Unfortunately, he passed away, I think, last year. And you'll see this in Gerald Zaltman's work, Harvard Business Review writer and professor. So he wrote an article back in 2003 to this effect. So there's really only years and years of additional scientists proving out the same thing. We are actually not in control of our choices. It's our subconscious mind that's dictating most of the choices that we make, and this is not just true in the world of brands. It's really true of everything that we do.
I want to dig in a little more and ask you about this. While it makes sense for instinct to play a leading role in subsequent decisions, do we use logic more heavily in our initial purchase decisions? That's the question that I had.
It's actually quite the opposite, but it's a great question. We make our decisions on instinct, and then our conscious mind post-rationalizes that decision. So our first instinct is where we go first, both in deciding, everything from the brands we buy to who we love. And that may be good or that may be bad, but that's how human beings operate. And actually, interestingly, in B2B, because the very first thought that, a lot of our clients will say in B2B is, well, this is a more rational decision. There's all kinds of cost considerations and timing considerations and product features and benefits. But again, what we learn time and time again is that there are neural pathways, positive and negative associations that drive our choices. And the brand that you choose or the decision that you make is based on the one that drives the most instinctive brand preference.
Yeah, it struck me as I was reading your book. We have three pets in the house, and animals are very instinctive. So, I think we as humans like to think that our brains are closer to computers than mammals, but maybe that's not true.
That's exactly right. So one of the things that I think is going on right now, and I talk about this in the book, we are in the age of instinct. This is an era where people are really starting to understand how the brain works. And the reason that we have AI now is that, and such an effective tool, is that scientists used to think that the brain was like a computer, that it was a sequential machine. It makes decisions step by step. And they just couldn't get AI off the ground. And it's only because in the last 5 years, scientists finally realized that the human brain is an analogic machine. In other words, it connects the dots. And that's really how we make decisions so quickly and on instinct. And so once they patterned AI after the analogic human brain, where it is connecting all these dots really, really quickly, it unlocked the secret for how AI could so perfectly replicate the human brain, or at least as replicable as possible. There's still obviously some things that many things that humans can do that AI cannot. But boy, it sure is getting close.
You mentioned AI, and I'm wondering, what did you think in 1995 when you tried to convince brands that conventional wisdom for why people buy was just simply inaccurate?
Oh, people thought I was crazy. I mean, I spent 30 years really pushing a rock uphill because I was talking about these things. And I didn't have all the language yet. I mean, we didn't even probably talk about behavioral science back then. But I had discovered some things. I tell the story, the Johnson's baby story at the beginning of the book, where I put the first father in a Johnson's baby commercial. Or I advocated for that, even though my bosses really didn't want to do it. And then when we finally did it, I discovered that that was actually my first trigger. That the father taking care of the baby worked at a subconscious level the way mom and baby did not, and that it conferred positive associations on the brand in a way that nothing they had done before in advertising had ever accomplished. And that drove choice and it drove sales and the product started flying off the shelves. But that kind of scenario, when I was inside the corporate world and people were telling me no, we're not going to do this because we don't have any data to support what you're saying. That's a very strong part of my personal history, and I learned not to take the word no, and to just keep, pursuing what I believe to be the answers. And I knew that the answers lay in the instinctive mind of consumers. And so that's why in 1995, I did leave the corporate world to start my own company, Triggers Brand Consulting. In the 30 years that I've been at Triggers Brand Consulting, we cracked the code on how do you actually drive consistent, accelerated growth by leveraging the levers of the instinctive mind. And the fascinating thing is that when you work at the instinctive level, you can make change much faster. You can change behavior and change brand preference much faster. Why? Because the conscious brain is resistant to change. It's skeptical. And you know that from the last conversation you had with a relative about politics, right, over Thanksgiving. It didn't go very well. We're about to have Thanksgiving again. And it's not going to go any better because human beings are unpersuadable. But if you go through the unconscious or non-conscious or instinctive mind, it's much more malleable, interestingly. And you can make change much faster and more easily there.
What I want to do is, because this is so challenging to conventional wisdom and marketing, I want to go through a couple of aspects of your book, and your approach, and just kind of ask you about those and kind of challenge you to provide the distinctions for us, what we may currently believe versus what the science tells us. For instance, let's start with emotion. In your book, you point out that instinct is separate from emotion. So many, even today, believe that people buy emotionally and justify intellectually. But that's not exactly your belief. Can you explain why?
So the way I look at emotion is an outcome. We all have feelings, but the feeling is the thing that you want to have as an end result. In other words, you can't tell people to love you. You can't force somebody to love you. You can't force somebody to connect with your brand. And so I have found in my 30 years of doing this that the use of emotion in advertising, it doesn't last very long. You can make somebody cry, you can make somebody laugh, but that's kind of going to go in one ear and out the other. What does stay is assets, distinctive brand assets, distinctive brand triggers. Those are the things that actually get into memory structure. And if they have enough positive associations, those assets, then the emotional connection will be the end result that you have. And so that's what we're after. And that's why I tell my clients all the time, don't just go out with an emotional campaign because that's actually not going to drive business growth.
And just to go a step further there, I want you to clarify, if you can, the difference between, say, brand impressions and brand associations, as you're suggesting. What is the difference, for instance, between awareness and mind share or salience?
Yeah, so all of these things are important, and there are various nuances around understanding, how they operate and what's going to be helpful to you. So let's take it apart. Let's start with what is actually driving your choices. And the answer to that is the brand connectome. That is the cumulative memories that get glued to your brand in the subconscious mind that are there cumulatively, maybe even since childhood for some brands. If you're Coke or Pepsi or McDonald's, you're going to have a brand connectome that's been around a very long time. And so a lot of memories have been built up. There's a model of the brand connectome behind me. That's kind of the symbolic representation of what it looks like in the mind. So that brand connectome, there are three things to make a healthy one. One, you want it to have a large physical footprint. It needs to be salient, because if it's salient, then it's a higher likelihood that it's going to be your instinctive go-to choice, because it just owns a lot of territory in the mind. And think of it as like a game of Monopoly. Whoever owns the most physical territory in the brain wins. And brands actually have physicality, which is wild to think, right? We kind of think of them as concepts, but a brand actually has physicality, and it has a physical footprint in your mind, and the larger, the better. So that's first, salience, large. Two, you want to have a higher ratio of positive to negative associations. Negative associations hold back growth. When negative associations get into your connectome, you have to nip them in the bud. You got to get rid of them, prune those dead leaves right away, because otherwise they will hold back your growth with the growth target. And then third, you want distinctiveness. You want to have clarity and distinctiveness versus competitive brands. So those are the three key things: large, positive, and distinctive. And that is the key to growing brands successfully. In a way, you can almost think of a brand like a seed that you plant in other people's minds, and you want to feed it and nurture it. So we're like all gardeners in a way of our brands. And so in this case, the soil, the water, the sun, what that is positive associations. Positive associations make your brand connectome grow. And the moment that your tree, your brand connectome, metaphorically a tree, is larger than that of the competition, then people switch to your brand.
So I want to drill in again to one of those pillars you just mentioned, which is distinctiveness. Because in marketing, we teach differentiation. And your book, you recommend brands be distinctive versus different. Can you explain that distinction?
Absolutely. So we have been raised on what I will call a myth, marketers. Marketers have been raised on this idea that uniqueness is the most powerful thing you can have. But wait a minute, human beings are hardwired to connect with the familiar. We actually reject the unique. I mean, think about a baby. If you take a baby out of its mother's arms, it is going to scream because the mom's face is familiar and the other face is not. Or think about the pandemic, when we were all, very worried about our security and our comfort, and we worried about survival, quite frankly. The first brands that we reached for were the brands that we knew so well, with the big names, those household names. And the brands that were left on the shelves were the ones that no one had ever heard of. So we are hardwired to connect with the familiar. And so that calls into the question, what is the value of uniqueness? We're actually pushing people away. So the new rule that I suggest is that familiarity is actually more powerful than uniqueness, and distinctiveness is best of all. And what is distinctiveness? Distinctiveness is putting a creative twist on something familiar. Think about the snow-capped mountain in the bottled water category. You take a snow-capped mountain, this tiny little, visual cue, and you look at it, and everyone has the same associations with that snow-capped mountain: pure, pristine, eco-friendly. water from the glaciers, the best water there is, right? Now, if I don't want to just use a simple snow-capped mountain, just like everybody else is a generic snow-capped mountain, I can render that snow-capped mountain with a wonderful abstract design, maybe put a little sunset behind it, make it look like a piece of design art, and put that on my bottled water. And now what I'm doing is I'm riding all of those positive associations, all those familiar pathways that are so valuable, pure, pristine, the best water there is. And I'm bringing that over to my brand, but I'm doing it in a distinctive way. And that's what I mean by distinctiveness versus uniqueness. Distinctiveness is riding existing neural pathways and making them belong to your brand.
So, given the principles we just discussed, I wanted to see if you can explain, say, former President Donald Trump's political brand and his hold on the electorate. Because even his most ardent supporters admit that he says and does things that they don't agree with. How can you explain that in terms of the brand connectome?
Let's stay neutral and let's just understand it scientifically. Um, President Biden and President Trump have a gigantic brand connectome because they have been building it up over 40 years, right? So the reason that we, first of all, have had those two candidates, President Biden, President Trump, as our lead candidates for this election is because the other candidates, their connectomes didn't measure up. They started too late, you could call it, or they were younger. And it's a rare situation where a brand can kind of come out of nowhere and make up all of the time of building all those positive associations. Biden and Trump just basically had a really gigantic head start on that. Now, that doesn't mean a newer, younger candidate can't succeed. Just look at President Obama. He did phenomenally well because he kind of got all the elements right on the brand connectome. And he was able to grow it very, very quickly at an accelerated pace. So it is possible to do, but it doesn't happen often. So the first answer to your question about President Trump, former President Trump, is that his connectome is very, very large. And his connectome is very positive with his base. For sure, there are a lot of other people in this country for whom his brand connectome is very negative. And so he has a lot of negative associations with them. But with his base, he has more positive than negative associations, and that's why they stick with him.
In your book, you talk about the tipping point. I wondered, in your experience, what does it look like when a brand starts to lose support and must be reconsidered by the consumer or rejected? What does that look like? And then how do you overcome that?
Yeah, so great question. So, the one thing you want to do is you want to continuously monitor the mind of the people you don't have. Because the growth target, that's what I mean by the people you don't have. You have your core customers, you have your growth target, right? And the another myth in marketing is that you should spend all of your time understanding your core customer and try to find more like them. That is a recipe for not a lot of growth. Because the fact is, you're going to get more growth from your growth target every single time. Current customers move out of your franchise all the time, this constant churn. So if you're not constantly replenishing your franchise with new people, you're going to have a leaky bucket. What you want to do is reach out to the growth target. But if they're not buying you, it means they have some negative associations or barriers, implicit barriers. So if you monitor the unconscious mind of your growth target, you can understand what the nature of those negative associations are, what the nature of those implicit barriers are. And what you want to do is you want to take down those barriers, take down those negative associations by displacing them with positive associations. like the ones in the snow-capped mountain, right? That's packed with positive associations. So what we want to do is we want to find out what the right codes and cues are, what the right cognitive shortcuts, verbal and visual, are that will take down those negative associations. And now you can get that growth target to come over to your brand and instinctively prefer your brand over the competition.
Instead of customer satisfaction, you're suggesting companies track their positive and negative associations, which in turn may impact their sales. In the book, you give examples of Victoria's Secret, Kohl's. Sales started to slip because of some negative associations had crept in. How do companies exactly track these associations?
First, to just answer the first part of your question, companies today are largely tracking attributes. And attributes are a list of things that, let's say it was in the beverage category. It tastes good, it's refreshing, like a list of attributes that they have provided to a research company to track. And so you're not really uncovering associations which exist at a subconscious level. And what you need to do to get at those subconscious associations is you need to use a technique called memory elicitation. And what that does is pulls out so that you can see the negative associations and positive associations that exist in people's minds that are not apparent to the naked eye, so to speak. We use projective techniques to get at those, to uncover those, and now you understand a boatload about what you need to do to overwhelm those negative associations with positive ones. But if you're not monitoring those negative associations, they can kind of collect hidden from view. And that's what happened to Kohl's and Victoria's Secret. There were all these negative associations that were accumulating in the minds of the growth target, the people that they didn't have, but that they rely on for growth. And then suddenly business is surprised when the business drops off and the leaders say, wait a minute, what happened? We're in shock that the business fell off so much. But actually, had they been monitoring the subconscious or non-conscious mind of the growth target, they would have seen that those negative associations were accumulating all along. So you can almost think of it like an early warning system to get ahead of what's going to happen to your growth moving forward, and do something about it before it starts hurting your business.
I've got one more question. I kind of wanted to finish up on something just practical and tactical for those who may be watching. So if you're, say, an everyday content marketing manager tasked with writing the next blog or, producing the next commercial, what approach can you take right now just to start thinking about it differently and making it more compelling?
I would say from a visual standpoint, to look for those sticky codes and cues that are packed with meaning. So don't just choose any visual. Choose a visual that actually acts as a cognitive shortcut, like the snow-capped mountain, where it's packed with positive associations that are universal triggers. So that's the first thing that I would do. The second thing I would do is probably choose an array of, I don't know, 10 or 15 of those verbal and visual triggers and just use them over and over again. Don't be afraid to repeat, because repeating is critical. That's how we learn as human beings. So I would say find those cognitive shortcuts, sort of create a portfolio of 10 to 15 of them, and then just use them repeatedly, and consistently, and make sure that they relate back to your brand. Visually tie people to your brand, so that those positive associations come back to help you and to help drive instinctive choice.
A lot of what we talked today, challenges, like I said, the traditional marketing concepts that we all have, and the traditional wisdom. So I imagine people are going to want to dig into this a little more. So where can they go to find out more about you and your book?
Well, my book is available on Amazon.com. That it's called The Power of Instinct: The New Rules of Persuasion in Business and Life. It came out in June. And so what I'm offering is really a whole new set of rules, and they're not just theories, they're actually rules that I've put into place for the past 30 years to build some of the largest brands in the Fortune 500.
Well, as a 20-year marketer, this conversation, your book have just been inspiring and challenging. Thank you for the powerful insights. I appreciate you taking the time to answer my questions today.
My pleasure. This was a lot of fun.